You're watching News 5. Analysts in Singapore have mostly disagreed with the rankings of an Oxfam international study that places Singapore among the bottom 10 countries for tackling inequality. While they agree that Singapore's system is by no means perfect, they say the report favours countries with a welfare-based system and neglects to look at the outcomes of policies. Meanwhile, the government points out that it aims to achieve real outcomes for the people rather than satisfy ideologically driven indicators.
A recent Oxfam study has used social spending, tax policies and labour rights to show how effectively countries were tackling inequality, placing Singapore 149 out of 157 countries. This puts the Republic in the company of countries such as Bangladesh and Laos. Within Southeast Asia, countries ranked much higher than Singapore include Myanmar at 138th and Cambodia at 121st. The report gave Singapore poor scores for its spending on health, education and social protection. But experts say these fail to look at actual outcomes.
Even though we may not spend as much as many other countries, they have ignored the fact that this very careful spending has yielded significant benefits, very good outcomes. A study which is based very much on a paradigm in which the conception of what would be ideal would be that of a welfare state. If you go by many other United Nations indicators, life expectancy, human development indicators, the quality of education in our system, they are totally at odds, with what this survey has pointed out.
What we have to ask ourselves as Singaporeans is the reality such that a vulnerable Singaporean would willingly and happily move to these other countries which are ranked much higher than us within Asia? I think the truth is no.
Oxfam, a UK-based organisation which aims to alleviate global poverty, said that Singapore's tax regime was mainly why it fared poorly. It claims that the country undertaxes large corporations and the rich, which deprives the government of funds for tackling poverty and inequality. But a tax expert believes that smaller economies like Singapore, which rely on foreign investments, cannot be held to the same standard as larger countries such as the United States and China.
What they do have is actually a very significant economy, and they are probably able to get away with a higher tax rate to actually fulfill their fiscal objectives. Now, and multinationals will actually gladly pay the price, pay the taxes, because they see that as a price of being able to access the local market.
Analysts also say the report doesn't show how the tax system here leads to inequality. Mr. Goh pointed out that almost half the population doesn't need to pay income tax, while Mr. Thassara said the vulnerable get government rebates and subsidies, such as vouchers to offset the goods and services tax or GST. In fact, tax revenue accounts for 66.2% of the government's annual budget, which includes spending for education and health. In the 2017-2018 financial year, the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore collected $50.2 billion, with GST accounting for 1/5. Experts agree that Singapore will have to work on tackling inequality, including how it ensures equal access to opportunities. They also agree the report isn't reflective of where Singapore stands when it comes to tackling inequality.
In response, Social and Family Development Minister Desmond Lee said the income tax burden on Singaporeans is low. In fact, half the population do not need to pay income tax, but they benefit more than proportionately from the high quality of infrastructure and social support. He added the report does not look at the outcomes achieved, such as the 90% home ownership and more than 80% own their homes among the poorest 10% of households. Mr. Lee also stressed that even with 4.6% of GDP spent on healthcare, Singapore is placed second globally by the Economist Intelligence Unit for Healthcare Outcomes and 6th by the World Health Organization. On education, he highlighted that Singapore's 15-year-olds ranked first in mathematics, science and reading, performing significantly better than OECD countries. On labour, Singapore has income support for low-wage jobs and worker upskilling with wage growth faster than the last decade. The Social and Family Development Minister said that the fact that the country has achieved all these with lower taxes and lower spending than most countries is to the Singapore's credit rather than discredit.